So evangelicals like stories where they're the heroes slash victims, and those are closely approximate.
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture.
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up. Then later on the pod, we sit down with Dr. Holly Berkley Fletcher, who's got a new book out, The Missionary Kids, Unmasking the Myths of White Evangelicalism. It's a good pod, so stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
I'm feeling a little underdressed for this intro today.
Well, since this is not on video, why don't you expand?
Yeah, I will, and I'm going to try to make this make sense to anybody else out in the world who doesn't share our lived experience growing up. But our interview today is with Holly Berkley Fletcher, who wrote a book, Missionary Kids.
Right.
And it's a wonderful book. It's a great conversation, but it's just taken me back to a place of my childhood.
Oh my gosh, it did.
And
totally.
She talks in the book about bringing, the churches bringing missionaries, back through church to talk and tell about their work. And I've just, so all week long working through this book, I've been, a 6-year-old little girl sitting in the pew. And since this is November, it would have been black patent leather shoes.
Well, of course.
Not white patent leather
With
shoes.
With little white ruffle socks.
Yes, or tights,
Or
depending.
okay.
Yes, and a dress. So, anyway, so that's where my mind has been all week long, and so here I sit in a hoodie and shorts, thinking, I can't be talking about this dress like this. I must have a certs mint and a book from the church library.
Oh my gosh! Wow, you did do a deep dive into this.
I did. Well, in also preparing for this intro, I did a little bit of research. You know how I'm a big fan of the Google research.
Oh yeah. University of Google.
We want to be sure and pass along accurate information. But yes, I was going down the rabbit hole and looking up information on Lottie Moon and Annie Armstrong.
Oh, blessed be her name.
Right. So if you grew up Southern Baptist,
which we did,
my apologies to those of you who might not have, but the two biggest special offerings of every year in the Southern Baptist Church was, and I presume still is, Annie Armstrong and Lottie Moon.
Annie Armstrong for North American missions and Lottie Moon for international missions.
Right. And I always feel like Annie Armstrong got slighted a little bit because she
Annie
was just North American missions. Right. And as kind of matches the some of the points that are made in this book. Yeah. It's really the foreign missions that are sexier, right? Should I not?
That needs to be a T-shirt for international missions.
That's okay. Sorry. Please excuse that I use that word, but
you're not wrong.
I'm not wrong. And in particular, foreign missions in third world, underdeveloped countries and things like that. So that's when everybody got really excited and gave money. And I can remember, my parents encouraging us to give money from our allowance. Did you have to do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember growing up on the east side of Tulsa, attending exciting Eastwood Baptist Church and missionaries, especially missionaries coming from Africa into the church. And they had the old slides and I can hear them clicking and the photos coming up. I can hear it all.
So when I was looking through information online, just to refresh myself on Annie Armstrong and Lottie Moon, which I presume they still do these offerings because the websites are still there and have videos and everything. But I went to government historical websites because I wanted to get, non-religious information. And I found a couple of interesting notes on both of these women that I wondered if I could share really quick. So Annie Armstrong, who is the woman who is lauded for North American missions, for whom that offering is named for, I found this blurb about her from a Maryland.gov site. It says, while working as a missionary with indigenous people, Armstrong provided much needed clothing and supplies. She also rallied groups to support immigrants who were arriving at the port of Baltimore, orphans and the poor with education and funding. Armstrong's mission work encompassed people of all cultures, races, ages, and economic levels. She was a dreamer in action. When she saw a need, she dreamed about how to meet that need and was gifted in involving others to carry out that dream. So anyways, I just thought that was interesting that she, was focused on immigrants, on helping indigenous people. I leave room for the fact that there's a lot of subtext that maybe we don't know. However, I found that interesting.
Well, I do appreciate Annie, getting clothes for us, because until then we just all walked around without a stitch of clothing on.
Right. I understand there's some problematic potential there, but the big thing I wanted to hone in on was she, rallied groups to support immigrants.
Yeah.
And I just find it ironic that the Southern Baptist Convention is still holding this offering for someone who, wanted to support those, shall we, I don't know, say refugees?
Exactly.
I don't know. Can we draw that? Can we connect those dots? And so next, Lottie Moon, who, was a missionary in China, she established schools for girls, and she worked to free them from customs such as foot binding.
Right.
So, I feel like that's pretty good practical use of mission work. She stayed in China through political unrest, inadequate support from her sponsoring board, and she ultimately died of starvation because she was, again, this is according to a historical site, she was handing out food and refusing food herself because people were hungry. She likewise protested against the expectation that women missionaries were sent abroad only to help their male counterparts. Instead, she argued that women's work should be appreciated and that female missionaries should make decisions in the field on an equal status with their male colleagues.
Oh my gosh. Southern Baptists do not know.
They don't get irony. They know not what they do.
No, exactly.
I'm telling you, these women are honored and hailed, every year.
Every year.
And they both were advocates for standing up for women's voices and women's rights and everything. So I found that a little bit comical as I was
so funny.
preparing for this intro today. So,
but you're right. It brought back so many memories of reading this book.
It really did. And for me, two things about missions growing up. It was always interesting when missionaries came, but I always had this horrible fear of being called, which we'll talk about that a little bit in the interview too, to go into mission work.
Why did you have a fear of being called to missions?
I didn't even go on mission trips. And I would love to sit here and tell you it's because I was principled and didn't agree with mission tourism.
Because you were doing the Lord's work right there in your neighborhood, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And we shouldn't be like, the whole mission tourism industry that's problematic. I would love to say
you have
that's
high principles, Missy, even at a young age.
But no, my churches always went to places that were really hot.
And what's the problem with hot?
I can't be like Jesus when I'm sweaty, y'all. It just doesn't work for me. I can't. When I'm sweaty and when I'm driving a car, there's just very little Jesus involved, I have to say. I know that sounds terrible, but
oh my gosh.
No, I actually somehow missed going on youth group mission trips. The sweating, I'm not going to lie, is part of the issue, but we were moving around a lot, so I just wasn't that entrenched in those circles. But anyways, so that was always my fear, was being called. Even when we were engaged, that was my biggest fear.
That I was going to get a call to missions?
Yes. I remember talking to my mom about that and being like, I don't want to go to the mission field. But to me, and again, this speaks to the book and to the the ideas we have in our head. The best of the preachers always end up going to the mission field.
Yeah.
And what
does that say about me?
Well, one could conclude that you're not trying to run away from something.
Oh, okay.
I'm not saying that all of them do. We've known some incredible folks who worked on the mission field, but there are some who go on the mission field as a way to escape responsibility for other things they maybe shouldn't be doing. Okay. So, but no, at that time I just thought, oh my gosh, what if you get called to Africa or something? I can't, or anywhere overseas.
Yeah. I would have run it by you. I'd have made certain the climate was appropriate.
I know this does not paint me in a very good light, but I'm just telling the truth here.
Oh my goodness.
So anyways.
Yeah. So, it was really a fascinating discussion overall. again, it brought back memories for us. But in the conversation that we had with Holly today, we did unpack a lot of things. You're going to hear a lot about her experiences as an MK growing up in Kenya, but we also have conversation about missions overall. And it really did spawn a lot of conversation between you and I before and after the interview
Mm-hmm.
about kind of the modern era of missions. And you know this, I've had a lot of issues just with missions overall. You have too. You've referred to mission tourism,
Mm-hmm.
quite frequently, even in this conversation. But yeah, I've struggled with it, and you know, this is going to be shocker, Missy. My theology has evolved over time.
You're kidding.
I mean, I went to seminary, a good little fundamentalist, and I am who I am now. But studying the scripture, reading the Bible, especially trying to be a student of Jesus, the prophet, and Jesus, the rabbi, has really changed the way not only do I see the world, but how I want to practice my faith. And for me, for so long, especially growing up, the Great Commission was what it was all about.
Right.
It was about go therefore and make disciples, baptizing them name in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm. You have to go.
You have to go and you have to baptize. Basically, it was about conversion.
Mm-hmm.
Everything you did
Well, because
was
everybody
about
else is
conversion.
lost. Did you not
Right.
know that? They're
No, I didn't
lost.
know that.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, it was all about conversion, and that just was instilled in me, and I never questioned it. I just thought, okay, well, they're right. That's before Jesus ascends into heaven. That's the order he gives us. So surely that's what we're supposed to do. And so I just never really questioned that idea. But as I have read scripture, as I have reflected upon this, as I've thought about it in my own ancestral history, it's become more problematic for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mind saying today, I have de emphasized the Great Commission in my overall theology.
Mm-hmm.
And in its place, I have put the Great Commandment: love God with all your heart, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as you would love yourself. To me, the Great Commandment was at the heart of Jesus' theology.
Well, and that should inform your footsteps.
Absolutely. It should inform your footsteps. And so missions should not be fueled by the Great Commission. That's what you do. It should be fueled by the Great Commandment. And the Great Commandment is to simply love
Mm-hmm.
and simply to to reach out to those who are in need and to meet those needs where you see them. And that's one of the things that I was taught by some of the missionaries that were in our church. For example, when I was a pastor here in Norman at North Haven, we had a missionary who started a NGO over in sub-Saharan Africa, and it was simply to distribute insecticide-treated mosquito nets
Mm-hmm.
to villages out in really remote parts of sub-Saharan Africa because people were dying of malaria.
Right.
And when I would go over to Africa with him, and I understand, there's going to be a lot of people who maybe question why would you go to the expense of doing that, and that is a fair, legitimate criticism or critique of any kind of missions. But the reason we would do it was not because we wanted to convert people to Christianity. It was because
Or for photo ops.
or to photo ops, yeah.
Yeah.
It was because people were dying. Babies were dying. Mothers were dying. Elderly were dying of malaria.
So then that begs the question, why didn't you just send the nets over there and
Yeah.
use the money you spent for the trip to send the nets over there?
And that is a fair question. And I was told by the missionary, and it was confirmed with my own eyes, that the reason we would accompany the nets over there and place the nets in the hands of mothers and the elderly was because in the logistical calculus of getting nets from one place to another or to the hands of people who need them.
In the remote
Yeah,
villages.
in the remote places, there were a lot of things that could go wrong. And whether it's on the front side or the back side, corruption is corruption. And I remember walking into a village in northern Ghana one time near Yendi, which is the remote of remote. As the missionary said, this is somewhere that National Geographic's not even been.
Mm-hmm.
I remember walking into a clinic that had a warehouse and the warehouse was filled with mosquito nets
Mm-hmm.
with USAID stamped on the side of them. And when we asked the administrator of the clinic why weren't these nets being distributed, he came up with some cockamamie explanation. But when you ask the locals, they would say, well, they try to sell them to us.
Mm.
And we can't even afford food. How are we going to buy nets? And so the purpose for us going over there and handing the nets to these mothers and elderly was to ensure that they were getting them.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that kind of missions is fueled by the Great Commandment and not the Great Commission. And I think that's a delineation that I hope that we can all strive for.
Right. And you told me a story also, I remember about, of course, while you were there, you would visit
Sure.
with local pastors and churches and some other kind of folks on the ground who
Right.
work over there that we have relationships with. So share about baptizing.
Yeah.
Because I know that's something that a lot of mission trips want to do.
Mhm.
They want to go over and save lost souls and then baptize folks in other countries. And so share about kind of your experience doing not doing that.
Yeah, having conversation with local pastors and local leaders in these churches, one of the things that became very apparent was that a lot of evangelical pastors and leaders go over there, and they go over there with a parental mentality that they are there to teach the locals or to impart their wisdom and theology and uh, and practice of faith upon the people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that is just BS, in my opinion, because I found that I learned more from local leaders and local pastors about how they do ministry in their cultural context. I had no idea what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I was just there to bring some nets over and to hand them to people and hopefully save some lives. But what they were doing, and we let them take the lead and listened and learned from them. But one of the assumptions made by a lot of the local pastors was that I was there to preach the gospel and I was there to convert people to Christianity. And more importantly, I was there to go down to the river, get into the water, and baptize Africans and take a picture of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no. I said, I do not want to do that. I think it's the responsibility of the local minister to shepherd his or her flock.
Mm-hmm.
And to baptize those that they have spent maybe a lifetime or years building that relationship, not some guy who flies in and flies out in 10 days.
Right.
And I thought that was egregious, and I still think it's egregious when that happens. And so I said no time and time again. There was one pastor in the Volta who just would not let me get away
Mm-hmm.
with it. So we did go down to the Volta River. I did get in, but I insisted he go in with me
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted him to do the baptism or us to do it together. And it was one of the most unique experiences of my life because as he and I waded out into the water there in the Volta, two deacons went out with sticks. And I said, well, what are the deacons here for? And he said, to fight away the crocodiles.
Oh my gosh.
I said, let's get this done and get it done quickly.
So yeah, but that's what, and
yeah.
I've read so many books, memoirs more so than this type of book about from missionaries and their experiences and what they learned on the mission field about locals and how they receive white missionaries, and what you're saying confirms what they've said is that in particular third world countries, they see the white man coming and they know, okay, we've got to do the dance, we've got to get people baptized and everything so we can get whatever they're bringing, and then they'll go on their merry way. And of course at that point there's no really depth of relationship. There's no I don't know, there's just nothing good of that.
No, I don't think there's anything good of that.
But that's what they're used to. And they're like, okay, we'll do this thing and just so we can get you to go.
Right.
And so I think that's really important point to make. And listen, I know we're running long and we've got to shut this down. This is not to say that there's not good work being done in the world.
No.
Helping people, like you said, the mosquito nets. I know there's...
We bring a name up in the interview, Sam and Melody Harold, who are in Kenya.
Yeah.
They're doing remarkable work. Have been doing it for decades,
Right.
helping build schools for children, but they do it with local leadership, and they let the local leadership take control of it and buy into the school, and it becomes entirely sustainable on a local cultural level. But they're just kind of there as catalysts, and they recognize that there are some great missionaries out there doing remarkable work, and so we do want to say that up front.
And we have grown, but what we've grown up
Mhm.
hearing and what we'll talk about in the interview is just kind of the deification of the missionaries from us back home who were, sitting in church hearing about their work on Sunday
Yeah.
night. It was, and so I think it's really important to look at the real lived experiences of these folks and their children in particular, as Holly, discusses or focuses in on her book,
Right.
and be real about what we're doing.
Yeah.
And what our motivation is, and where are the missteps that we've taken along the way that we need to roll back.
Yeah, I agree. So Misty and I will be right back with Dr. Holly Berkley Fletcher and her new book, The Missionary Kids, Unmasking the Myths of White Evangelicalism.
The ministry networks of the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship are excited to head back to Montreat, North Carolina for Oasis 2026. Held at the Montreat Retreat and Conference Center on February 3rd through the 6th, Oasis is a spiritual retreat for those who work with children, youth, college students, and young adults. The theme for the retreat is Rooted and will be led by speakers Reverend Timothy Peoples and Reverend Xiomara Ribores Ortiz and worship leader Catherine Mullen. We hope you'll plan to join us for this time of rest, renewal, worship, fellowship, and fun, and hope you will invite others to do the same. Visit the Youth Ministry Network at cbfymn.org for more information. See you there.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. Dr. Holly Berkley Fletcher is a historian, essayist, and former intelligence analyst. She was raised in Kenya by missionary parents. She earned a PhD in American history and taught in universities for several years before being hired as an Africa analyst by the Central Intelligence Agency, where she worked for 19 years. She writes with Substack, A Zebra Without Stripes. So make sure you go subscribe to her Substack. Her most recent book, The Missionary Kids, Unmasking the Myths of White Evangelicalism, is in bookstores now. Holly, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So Holly, like you said, thank you for joining us. I'm going to start off by saying, first, Herman Melville gave us Call Me Ishmael. Not too long after that, Charles Dickens gave us It Was the Best of Times, It Was the Worst of Times. And now you have given us I've only known one probable murderer in my life, and he was an evangelical missionary. I'm telling you, if that's not a perfect hook for the first line of a book, I don't know what is. And the even better thing about that is yours is a work, not a work of fiction.
Literary gold.
Yes, it truly was.
It sucks you in, right?
It truly does. I'm like, I'm here for this, right? I want to hear this story. So I just want to say the book was great. I very much enjoyed listening to it. But before we get into that, we need to know a little bit about your backstory. So obviously, Mitch mentioned you grew up as a missionary kid, or more affectionately known as an MK in Kenya. Tell us a little bit about that experience and how it has shaped you.
Yeah, so we went when I was 8 years old, and before that, my dad was in the military, so we moved around a lot. So I have some memories before we went, but because we moved around, and there was a lot of change already, my memories really take hold when we got there, and that was a big sort of turning point in my life. And then I stayed until I graduated high school, and I say Kenya is my great unrequited love because I fell in love as a child. I've been in love with that country for my whole life, but it was not something I could sort of keep. I never as missionary kids, you don't fully belong to the place that you grow up, the place that you love. You're always being prepared to leave. So it's kind of like a long grieving process that starts. You kind of know once I think I sort of it dawned on me, very in a very tough way that I was going to be leaving, certainly by the time I started high school. and then it continued well after my departure and into college. So grief has been a big part of that experience, and a big part of who I am. And yeah, but I adore the country, the people, the animals. I take trips as often as I can. I take group, and I've started taking safari groups. I will always be connected.
Yeah. Well, I have been to Kenya, been to the Rift Valley, loved it. I mean, just had a great time over there, working with some missionaries who are on the ground over there. Actually, Sam and Melody Harold grew up in Kenya
Oh,
and
I
still
know.
live there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know them, and I know their Sam's parents.
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, when we arrived, Sam, I think, was a senior in high school, so I didn't overlap with him, but I knew
Hmm.
his sweet parents very well.
Yeah.
And
And
I'm in touch with them, with Sam and Melody now, actually. So
yeah, they are absolutely terrific. In fact, Holly, I know this is great for radio, but I got this scar over in Kenya, fell out of a truck and
oh,
broke my arm. So it was quite the
oh no,
experience.
that's not good.
No, it was
Oh,
not good at the time, but gave me a story and something I can write about and talk about today. So,
wow. Okay, we'll save that for another day.
absolutely. Well, hey, congratulations on the book, The Missionary Kids: Unmasking the Myths of White Evangelicalism. You share a lot of your story in the book, and as you describe kind of the missionary experience, you were an MK, as Missy said a moment ago. Your parents were missionaries over there. When we think about missionaries, we hold missionaries in a special place in our hearts and minds, and most Christians do. There is both reverence and a mystique about them more than probably any other position within the church. So, by sharing your story, you really honestly and genuinely dispel some of those myths associated with missions, reminding readers that missionaries are human beings. So,
Very
can
much.
you talk about some of those myths that you mentioned in the book?
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, especially I was grew up Southern Baptist, and especially for Southern Baptists, it's actually in their beginnings. They started in order to form their own mission board,
Right.
and in order to actually appoint slaveholders as missionaries. So that is at the very beginning and the very heart of the Southern Baptist story, and it's missionaries are still at the heart of Southern Baptist life, but then other evangelicals too. It is the missionary calling is something that is lauded. If you want to be a real saint, you go be a missionary. Africa is like top of that,
Mhm.
Indeed.
pinnacle. Even though sub-Saharan Africa kind of doesn't need, they certainly don't need evangelists anymore,
Hmm.
because sub-Saharan Africa is heavily, heavily not just Christian but evangelical Christian. But still, people still think that that's the pinnacle of
Right.
missionary life. And for missionary children, this sort of mythology is really a burden. I remember growing up and just rolling my eyes, but also being kind of outraged to hear my parents described as super Christians, or the way they were, talked about. And it wasn't that they were bad people; it's just that they weren't saints. Like I knew them as, and it sort of glossed over my own experience. Missionary kids are sort of expected to smile and wave and be good and sort of cooperate with the work of God,
Hmm.
and they're really deprioritized, certainly by the culture, if not by their own parents. So the missionary story I arranged the book according to four myths that are really at the center of missions, but also the way missions sort of project a positive self concept to evangelicals.
Right.
So evangelicals, like, the sort of vaunted, the sort of exaggerated sense of calling, and how that trumps everything else. I think we've all been in the situation where someone, you know, proclaims that God told them to do something, and that sort of shuts the conversation down in Christian circles.
Hmm.
It doesn't, you can't really ask questions like, maybe that's not a good idea, or maybe that's not a healthy thing, or maybe that's coming out of a place of a not healthy place. So that's one. The myth of multiculturalism, particularly since the civil rights movement, missions is seen as Americans, white Christian Americans, engaging in, building the global church in this beautiful partnership, when actually it's generally, you know, controlling what kind of Christianity is spread around the world,
Mhm.
and not creating equal partnerships, and glossing over their own troubled history with race here in America. And then the myth of saints, as we talked about, that chapter goes into a lot of abuse on the mission
Yeah.
field and problems of accountability. And then the myth of indispensability. I think it's central to American white evangelical American sense of self that's tied to a sense of American exceptionalism, that they're sort of the chosen people, that God needs them to really, accomplish his work. This narrative is also tied to Christian nationalism, which is obviously is under a lot of discussion. So all those myths, you see how they're used and misused in missions, but then you can apply that to the broader white evangelical landscape.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to talk a little bit more about calling, because I think that was the beginning part of the book where you talk extensively about that. And I think you did such a great job of putting into words, what I had been feeling about that for a long time. You say calling remains a pervasive yet ambiguous concept in present day American evangelicalism. It is often claimed, rarely explained, and almost never scrutinized. The myth of calling is that a person can receive a clear, unequivocal guidance from God, and maintaining this myth can result in devastating consequences, particularly for the children involved. I want to talk a little bit more about that, because we see, and you discuss this even outside of the missionary realm a little bit too in the book, about how that leaves people so vulnerable and how that leaves people in power who shouldn't be. So talk to us a little bit about calling, explain that to our audience.
Yeah, so people see the myth of calling and they think I'm saying there's no such thing as calling, and that's absolutely not what I'm saying. I tell people, in a way, I felt called to write this book, so I definitely believe in calling. But this idea that it must subsume everything else about one's life and choices, that you can't sort of be critical, and that you and others can't question a sense of calling, and also the assumption that a sense of calling necessarily comes from a good and healthy place. When I think we all have seen examples of people acting out their wounds and dysfunctions through something claimed as a divine calling.
Mhm.
You know, and I've seen that definitely on the mission field. So it's not that I don't believe in calling, but I think the way it's conceived of in white evangelicalism is a little bit off and sort of dangerous. And then I talk about in the book too the cultural component of our idea of calling, and how it springs from, living lives of so much choice that most of the world doesn't really have. If you have unlimited choices, then this sense that you're on a search for some divine, guidance of what to do becomes extra important. You're sort of, and can it be a tremendous comfort, like we all want to make the right choices in our life, and we all face so many very large choices in our life. So the idea of calling is a sort of solace in that jungle of choice, when for the most of the world they don't have those choices. Choice can be good and bad. It can be wonderful to have the freedom to sort of choose your own path, but at the same time, I think we've all experienced being sort of overwhelmed and confused, and sort of burdened by choice as well. So I think calling addresses that sort of cultural need as well.
And it also, like you kind of allude to in the book, enables people who need to move, especially men who are in positions of power, to claim this, and then nobody questions it, and then they're able to
Absolutely.
evade any sort of scrutiny about anything they might have been doing that they shouldn't have been doing. And so this is, I mean, I've before your book, I've read multiple books about stories of this happening within families, and just how dangerous that is for other parts of the world, for their own families. But we just have always, if somebody says they're called, in particular a white man says I'm called to
Yeah.
do something, it's exactly what you referenced in the book. God said it. What is it, what's the phrase?
God said it, we believed it, and that settles it.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
And you're not allowed to question that. So
Yeah. It's good that you specified men, because what do most white evangelicals think if a woman claims that God has called her to preach, for instance, or be the minister of the gospel? That's like, oh, well, she's, that's not God, that's not God talking to her.
Right.
And it's like, well, how do you know? Like, how do you, and also, what if you're saying that about a woman, then why can't we also question a man's calling? So.
Well, now you're just getting very problematic, Holly.
She's so
I'm very
controversial.
problematic.
You're
I've
taking
been
it.
problematic for a very long time in my life.
You're
So
taking it way too far.
yeah. I always have. I've always been problematic.
So, Holly, in this conversation about calling, I mean, and you also mentioned American exceptionalism. As I was reading through this section of the book, one thing kept coming to mind. It's a problem I've been having for quite some time now, and that is how influential the theological doctrine of Calvinism plays a part, not only in the Christian theology generally, but also in American exceptionalism. And of course, the doctrine of
Yeah.
election, meaning that God has looked down upon the earth and has decided to set people, either individuals or a group of individuals, apart from others. And, whether that is the ruling class, whether that is the wealthy class, or whether that is Christians at large, it's a bit of, well, it's arrogant, in my opinion, to say that that is the case. But in another section of the book, you talk about how this is permeating throughout Christianity, and you talk more about Christian isolationism, and that you got to experience this firsthand. More and more Christians are removing themselves from society and placing themselves within homogeneous communities, setting themselves apart from the world, which, is antithetical to the gospel and especially to the ministry and teachings of Jesus. So, as you talked about that, what was so alarming to you when you experienced it and as you see it in generally right now?
Well, I think, I talk about growing up in the bubble, and I think the way society is arranged, and certainly socioeconomically stratified, and it's racially stratified, and not stratified, but just divided. I mean, and politically, the Reds, you guys are probably least in a bubble, because you're I don't know what your political persuasions are, but you strike me as more moderate types. You're definitely, not MAGA, but you're living in Oklahoma. So congratulations, you're kind of out of your bubble. But a lot of us, live in bubbles, and it's sort of inevitable. I think the problem is the claim of, it's the fact of bubble life or separation is one thing. And I do think culturally in the United States, certainly the way evangelicals have sort of walled themselves off is increasingly problematic. But in the missions context, it's not so much the bubble, it's the claim that the bubble doesn't exist. It's the claim of multiculturalism that's not there.
Mhm.
And the reason why this is harmful or problematic is because, it's kind of like the ideology of color blindness. It sort of denies the influence and reality of people who are not in your bubble.
Right.
And you're sort of claiming this sort of even exchange, or mutual relationship, a relationship of mutuality that is not there.
Mhm.
And that's harmful, because it then shuts the door to actual education and enlightenment. So the colorblind ideology, which came after and replaced segregation and real hardcore racism, it's kind of a soft racism, where we dictate the terms. You come into our space and conform to our world. It's not that you're barred, it's just that you're controlled in that
Mhm.
way. And we retain the sort of control and the power within our world, while projecting this image and this claim of multiculturalism.
So obviously the book, in the title, The Missionary Kids, you speak from the perspective of yourself, a missionary child, but you also share stories from many other missionary kids, and you talk about kind of the way this system works globally. And one of the things that I was kind of surprised to learn about was kind of the boarding school system that many missionary kids end up in, and also the difference between the experiences of boys versus girls when they go on the mission field. Would you share with us a little bit about those kind of some of those things that missionary kids have a front row seat to and experience that maybe we don't realize?
Yeah, let me take the last one that you mentioned first, because that was really, an eye-opening. I had this like kind of epiphany in the course of interviewing people and researching this book. Because I always had the sense growing up that the boys just seemed more authentically sort of African, that
Mhm.
a lot of them spoke the language and had, experiences that I didn't have and wasn't really going to have. And this came up over and over again in the research of particularly people that had women who had brothers, and just how their brothers had much more freedom and to sort of play with boys, other local boys, and sort of roam around. There's a lot of reasons for this. Obviously, there's concerns for security. A lot of developing countries, women are not regarded very highly, and are and sexual abuse and assault is, very common, and rule of law is not always present. And so there are legitimate dangers for girls, but also because in a lot of cultures, girls are have more chores, or they have more homebound chores, or in some cultures they marry very young, if not as underage girls. And so, girls in a lot of local cultures are sort of stuck in their homes doing chores, versus the boys, if they have chores, it's usually herding,
Mm-hmm.
and that gives them a lot more freedom to roam and to sort of be out and about. So that was really an epiphany for me. The boarding school experience, it is changing somewhat. Back in the day, it was required by a lot of missions to send children to boarding school at age, immediately 5 or 6. And these schools were often extremely abusive, like use of corporal punishment. Although I also heard stories of sexual abuse. That's a problem in pretty much all boarding schools that I encountered, including mine. There are cases of that. Nowadays, it's not really seen as so acceptable to send young children, although that does still happen. And mostly children are sent at maybe junior high, high school, which is not as harmful, although can have repercussions for kids and families as well. And then the other difference now is that there's a lot more, with the internet, there's a lot more homeschooling opportunities. But that brings up another whole
Right.
category of problems of, isolation and lack of socialization and all of that. So there's, there's a lot of challenges to the MK life overseas,
Hmm.
regardless of what one's educational path is.
Sure.
So there's another part in the book, and I have to admit, I listened to it on Audible, and I was driving, so I couldn't bookmark it, and so I don't have a direct quote. But you made a great point, and it may have been through the lens or through the words of someone else about when you talk about the missionaries coming back home for those visits in churches. I remember them all too well. Like Mitch said, we almost needed a trigger warning. We both grew up
Hmm.
Southern Baptist, and this just like
Yep.
I mean, I could smell the perfume in the pews beside me as I was listening
I
to
could
you
hear the
talk about
clicks of the
this.
slideshows
That's
back in
right.
the
Oh
1970s.
yeah, the Chariots of
Yeah.
Fire.
Yeah.
Did you have Chariots of
Oh,
Fire? My dad
yes.
always
Oh,
played Chariots of
yeah.
Fire with his slideshow.
Yeah.
But you talk about evangelicals needing the stories of Christian persecution abroad in order to justify their own complex of being persecuted here.
Hmm.
And that just
Yeah.
made so much sense to me. Talk about that transference a little bit.
Yeah, so I think those are either the direct quote or a close approximation of Melanie McAllister's work. She's a historian and sociologist, actually here in Washington at GW, and she wrote a book on sort of the global breach of American evangelicalism. And I think, again, missions from the beginning, this has been the case. Missions is sort of a lovely mirror that, reflects back a view of themselves for white American Christians that is pleasing to them. So, in some way, or that reinforces their identity in some way. So, race has been a big part of that. Again, from the beginning, you could go, you have terrible race relations here and terrible racism and racial abuse and even slavery at the beginning of the missionary movement. But you can go overseas and engage in race there from a position of, more distance and less culpability, and sort of create a new narrative of race that is less challenging and problematic for you. The persecution thing is really big nowadays. They're actually, I don't know if you saw just the other day, Donald Trump truthed or tweeted or whatever you call it about Nigeria and Christians being persecuted there. That was also an obsession of his in the first term, because it's an obsession of his base. Any people may be dying, and there's a horrible, one of the world's worst conflicts going on in Sudan, but it's not a neat, Christian versus
Right.
Muslim conflict like Nigeria, and so they sort of gravitate towards that. So evangelicals like stories where they're the heroes slash victims,
Mm-hmm.
and those are closely approximate. And if they can see themselves in global Christians and sort of identify with global Christians and their persecution, which is in many cases very real around the world, then it sort of reinforces their sense of victimhood here in the US.
And we love being the victim hero. I mean,
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We love, I mean, there's a fine line, right?
right.
Martyr, hero, victim, hero. You're if you're abused and put upon, and then you triumph over all. So
Right. I thought that was just a really great point to make that I hadn't, specifically thought of before.
Okay, Holly, I'm going to get really controversial because
no.
I have been really struggling with this for decades now. And reading
Oh
this book,
good. So before you read my book, you were
oh
struggling
yeah,
with
yeah, yeah,
it.
yeah.
Is
But then this
good.
brought it all back. I had dealt with it and pushed it way down deep into my
Okay.
soul,
All
and
right.
you
All
brought
right.
it back up.
Okay. It's
But
not my fault
it's
then.
this. You mentioned Nigeria. Obviously, here in the States, I'm going to make this statement. A lot of the conflicts that we see, especially around the world, I lay at the foot of Christian missionaries, because at some point, or the Christian church and the idea and the missiology of the Christian church. Let me rephrase that. And the reason I do that is because the missiology of the Christian church let evangelism become the dominant feature of their missiology. And so you talk about Nigeria. We know what happened when missionaries came in and colonized that area and broke up the tribes, and ancestral lands were refigured. Same thing happened here in the United States. It seems as though Christian missions historically has been cover for political strategies to infiltrate countries, and they operate under the banner of conversion. And it becomes, in my viewpoint, it becomes very problematic. And as I continue to work through this, if you were really to take the Christian missiology with the emphasis on evangelism seriously, even within humanitarian work, a lot of times it's about conversion. That always leads to domination. And I've got a real problem with that.
Yeah, I see your point. I don't know that I would take it quite as far. Certainly, there's many conflicts that have nothing to do with Christians at all.
Right.
And certainly, there's other religions. I mean, Islam has also even more forcibly used conversion, and still does.
Sure.
These Islamic regimes that you die if you don't convert. Of course, that's been true in the Christian past as well, with the Crusades and things like that. So Christianity is not the only religion that does this. I think that it has often been, as especially as it's married to certainly, the European powers, and
Mhm.
then of course in our day and age, we are America is the superpower. But yeah, like I think anytime
Mhm.
that's why freedom of religion is so important, is
Absolutely.
because these are unanswerable. Religion addresses unanswerable questions,
Mhm.
and so individual conscience is really really important. And allowing people to come to their own answers to those unanswerable questions is really important. And anytime you marry religion with political power or military, any other sort of power, I think you have problems. But I wouldn't lay it all at the feet of American Christians. Certainly, there has been cases where missionaries of various kinds have come in with the goal of conversion, and created sort of stirred up social problems where they weren't there before. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would go. I would don't know that I'd be as harsh as you are.
Yeah. Well, and that is absolutely fair, and I think you make a great point that this is not just an isolated issue within Christianity. It covers a lot of religions, and their missiology of conversion, and so I think that's absolutely fair. It's just something I've been struggling with because if you think about all the rhetoric that I've heard throughout my life and the number of sermons that I've heard, it's all about winning the world for Christ and especially growing up Southern Baptist, the bold mission thrust, and we're continuing to hear kind of echoes of that today. It's just like, is that really what we're supposed to be
Well,
about?
there's it's very arrogant. I mean, I think you can't get away from the implicit arrogance there.
Right.
You're sort of coming at another group of people or another individual with this sense of I have the answers and you don't, and you need to see things the way I do them. Again, not with regard to issues that can be empirically proven,
Hmm.
with regard to issues that cannot be,
Right.
in which individual conscience is essential. And to sort of come into the relationship from the get-go with this sort of hardcore belief that only you are correct, and you are correct to the point that if the other person doesn't accept your point of view, they are eternally damned. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't care what your theology is. If that's your and what your sort of basis for that, I'm not critiquing one's theology per se, but I can't help but notice the implicit arrogance in that.
Yeah. That's well said. Well, we appreciate your time this week joining us on Good Faith Weekly. Holly's book is The Missionary Kids, Unmasking the Myths of White Evangelicalism. She weaves her story as well as some really great thoughts on missiology and missions abroad and evangelicalism. It is a brilliant book. Make certain you pick it up. And we really appreciate you joining us this week, Holly.
Thank you so much. It was super fun.
Good. Well, before we let you go, though, we've got one last question that we ask all of our guests, and Missy has the honor of asking it.
So, Holly, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is There's More to Tell. So, in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
Yeah, well, I've been thinking a lot about actually the influence of white evangelicalism abroad, and how, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, which I know the best, and just the ways that it has influenced politics there. And one of the things that I've noticed that I don't get into too much of the book is how white evangelicalism, with its emphasis on personal faith and piety along narrowly defined lines, really lets these sort of horrible dictators
Yeah.
and people in power off the hook. And those people who often claim their own evangelical faith as cover. So what we're experiencing here in the United States with Donald Trump sort of putting on the mantle of evangelicalism and claiming this huge voting bloc, and neutralizing criticism, particularly on behalf of marginalized people. That's a pattern you see really clearly in Africa as well.
Hmm.
And I can't help but connect it to the influence of white evangelicalism through missionaries, but also through a lot of mass media and culture as well.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us this week. It has been a pleasure. And we didn't even get to talk to her about her CIA experience. So I'm sure she's got deep secrets that she could spill. But
that's
maybe
after we stop recording.
That's right. Well, Holly, you're welcome back anytime. Thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you.
And to our audience, we want to thank you for joining us each week. And Missy and I will be back next week. And until then, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5. And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.